The truth stings before it teaches, and some truths burn so sharply that whole generations tried to hide them. But here you are, leaning in, asking a question most history books avoided on purpose. What happened to black men on plantations when the danger wasn't just the whip in a man's hand, but the quiet cruelty of the woman standing behind him? What happened when the person the world painted as fragile held a power that cut deeper than iron? You're with me now, and my name is Simmons. Welcome to Chronicles of Black. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, make sure you subscribe, and tell me in the comments how this truth sits with you, because this one is heavy. Elijah's story begins in the kind of silence only suffering can teach. He was born on a southern plantation in the mid-1800s, a place where the sun felt like punishment and the night felt like warning. His father was taken before he learned to speak. His mother wore pain like a second skin, pushing through each day because she had no other choice. Elijah grew up knowing the rules without anyone speaking them. Keep your head down. Work until your hands forget they belong to you. Stay silent, because silence keeps you alive. But Elijah wasn't ordinary. His memory cut sharp. His mind stayed awake even when his body begged to rest. He watched everything, listened to everything, and carried every detail like a secret map of danger. He knew when the overseer was in a foul mood by the way his boots hit the dirt. He knew when the master was drunk by the sound of his breath. And he knew the eyes of Miss Carolina. She watched him in a way that made the air feel wrong. Not a glance. Not simple curiosity. Something darker. Something she never spoke aloud, but he felt on his skin every time he walked past her. A stare that lingered too long, as if she owned more than his labor. As if she wanted something she would never dare admit. People today like to pretend white women were only victims or bystanders back then. But behind those walls, away from polite smiles and church hymns, many held power that could crush a man's life with a whisper. Elijah learned that truth early. He saw how Miss Carolina's tone could shift a room, how one word from her could bring punishment, how she carried a quiet authority that didn't need shouting. This is where Elijah's real battle began. Not just with chains, not just with work that broke his back, but with a danger that came wrapped in soft voices and gentle hands. A danger no one warned him about. A danger that didn't need a whip to scar a man. Because what trapped Elijah wasn't only the field, or the laws, or the chains. It was the gaze of a woman who held his fate like it was nothing. And he had no idea how deep that danger would cut. History gets blurry when people choose comfort over truth. Folks talk about slavery like it was only men with guns and whips, as if brutality had only one face. But anyone who's heard the whispered stories, the ones passed down in quiet rooms by trembling voices, knows better. Power didn't belong to one gender on those plantations. It flowed through whoever the system protected, and white women were protected by everything: laws, customs, and the silence of a world built to defend them. They were not the frail figures painted in school. They were the ones who ran the house like a kingdom. They assigned chores. They rationed food. They decided which slave children were allowed scraps from the table and which ones went hungry. Their husbands controlled the field, but they controlled the home. And the home was where many of the deepest wounds were carved. When the master traveled, she was the law. When the overseer needed orders, she gave them. When punishment was required, she didn't turn away. She watched. Sometimes she commanded, sometimes she demanded more. And behind closed doors, behind lace curtains and polished floors, another kind of cruelty lived. One the world still refuses to talk about. For young black men, the danger was constant. If they were strong, they were a threat. If they were handsome, they were a temptation. If they were quiet, they were suspicious. And if they looked a white woman in the eye for even half a second too long, their life could end before sundown. Elijah learned this fast. Miss Carolina called for him almost every day now, always with a task, always with some excuse that required him to be close enough to feel her breath. Fix this, lift that, carry this upstairs, clean the parlor, sweep the hallway. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Her authority was a blade hidden inside silk. Elijah felt the tension every time, a tightening in his chest, a warning in his bones. Her eyes followed him everywhere he moved, studying him like she was searching for something she thought she owned. Her smiles were small, controlled, unsettling. There was nothing kind in them. He knew better than to speak unless spoken to. He kept his gaze down. He answered her commands with "yes, ma'am," and he prayed each time the door closed behind them. The silence felt dangerous. The walls felt like witnesses too afraid to speak. Because Elijah understood the truth, every enslaved man knew she could destroy him with a single lie. She didn't need proof. She didn't need reason. All she had to say was, "He frightened me," or "He looked at me wrong," or "I felt unsafe." and that was enough to end everything. A black man's life hung on the thin string of a white woman's mood. That was the cage that never rusted, the one no one writes about. Every time Miss Carolina called his name, Elijah felt that cage close tighter. Every glance felt sharp. Every soft word felt like bait. He walked through the house as if the floorboards themselves could betray him. He didn't fear the whip, he feared the whisper behind it. And as the days passed, Elijah realized something chilling. Danger doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits in a quiet room. Sometimes it smiles at you. Sometimes it whispers your name. The storm rolled in long before the first drop hit the earth. It was in the air, thick and heavy, the kind of tension that settles on a man's skin and makes the night feel dangerous. Elijah lay on his cot, listening to the wind crawl across the fields, when the sound of footsteps broke the silence. Not the hurried steps of an overseer, not the tired shuffle of another slave. These were soft, careful. A house servant pushed aside the curtain and whispered his name. Her eyes didn't meet his. She didn't need to explain. Miss Carolina wants you in the big house. Now Elijah felt his stomach turn. His hands tightened into fists before he forced them open again. He rose slowly, hoping the delay might change something, anything. Maybe the master had returned early. Maybe Miss Carolina had gone to bed. Maybe this night would end like any other with fear, but not this kind. But hope felt foolish, and the storm outside seemed to agree. He walked toward the house with footsteps that felt heavy, each one dragging a prayer behind it. The hallway was empty. The lamps were dim. The entire house held its breath as if it already knew why he was there. Elijah moved like a man heading toward the edge of a cliff with no ground left beneath him. Miss Carolina met him in the doorway of her sitting room. Her voice was soft, too soft, the kind of softness that hides something sharp. She said she needed something repaired, but her eyes said otherwise. Her smile was small, warm in the wrong way. She stepped closer, praising the strength in his arms, the way he worked, the way he carried himself. She touched his shoulder with a hand that didn't belong there. Elijah didn't move. He didn't breathe. He knew the rules. A black man had no room to defend himself against a white woman's touch. Even fear could be mistaken for defiance. She came closer still, too close. Elijah felt his heart slam against his ribs as she reached toward his face. Her fingers brushed his cheek, and every instinct in him screamed to pull away. He did, just slightly, a small step, barely a breath of distance, but she followed. Her shadow covered him like a trap. Her presence pressed against him like a wall he couldn't push through. Elijah's hands stayed at his sides. His voice stayed locked in his throat. He knew that one wrong word could end his life. The room grew colder. The storm outside cracked against the sky, but it was nothing compared to what broke inside him. He felt stripped of something he couldn't name. Dignity, safety, control, whatever it was, it slipped through his fingers. Her whisper cut through the air, low, cold, meant to cage him forever. No one will believe you. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. A truth shaped by a world that never once cared about the cries of men like Elijah. When she finally stepped away, Elijah felt the ground sway beneath him. He backed out of the room without turning his back on her, the way an unarmed man retreats from a predator. When he reached the hallway, he finally exhaled. But the breath didn't feel like his. The rain had started by the time he reached the slave quarters. Thunder rolled overhead, but Elijah felt quiet inside. Too quiet. Something in him had been bent, twisted in a way he didn't choose and couldn't explain. He walked toward his cot with the weight of a man carrying a pain he never asked for, a pain he couldn't speak, a pain that lived in silence because silence was the only thing the world allowed him. And that night, as lightning lit the sky, Elijah understood something. He wished he never had to learn some wounds don't bleed. They just bury themselves deep, where no one can see them, and where no one ever comes to help. The days after that night become heavier than the storm that preceded it. Elijah wakes each morning with a knot in his chest, praying that Miss Carolina will forget him, ignore him, lose interest. But instead, her attention sharpens. It becomes obsessive, smothering, dangerous. She starts calling for him more often. Small tasks at first: polishing the silver, tending the fire, carrying trays up and down the long hallway. Tasks that force him inside the house, force him within reach of her gaze. Every time he enters, he feels the walls closing in. Every time she speaks his name, his stomach drops. The other slaves see it too. They whisper warnings in the shadows. Stay clear of her. But how do you run from someone who owns your footsteps? Elijah keeps trying to create distance. He lingers outside, volunteers for fieldwork, pretends to mishear orders. But Miss Carolina always finds him, always summons him, always finds a way to corner him with that same soft voice that now sounds like a threat. Then one afternoon, everything snaps. Her husband returns early from a business trip. Boots pounding through the house, doors opening, voices echoing, and then he sees them. Miss Carolina standing too close, Elijah standing too still, tension hanging in the air like smoke. She reacts first. Her eyes harden, her voice lifts with practiced innocence. Elijah's been getting too familiar, she says. He's forgetting his place. Her husband doesn't question her. He doesn't even look twice. His rage turns instantly toward the only person he is allowed to destroy. A whip is ordered. No explanation needed. No truth considered. The beating is merciless. Elijah's back becomes a battlefield of pain he never earned. The slaves gather at a distance, frozen, horrified, powerless. They've seen this before. They know the script. A white lie becomes a black man's sentence. Miss Carolina watches with a cold, distant stare. And then she walks away. Not a tremor, not a tear, not a flicker of remorse. Elijah survives, but something inside him fractures. Shame circles him like a noose. Fury burns in his chest with nowhere to go. Silence becomes his prison, one forced on him, one that devours him from the inside. And in that moment, Elijah understands a cruel truth. Sometimes the most fatal wounds are the ones you're never allowed to speak about. Elijah does not break. He bends, he bleeds, he trembles, but he does not break. The scars on his back become reminders, not defeats. Every step he takes in the slave quarters is met with quiet hands helping him sit, whispered prayers drifting over him like warm blankets, and eyes full of the kind of compassion the world keeps trying to destroy. The community that has survived centuries of cruelty surrounds him with the same invisible armor they wear every day. Over time, something shifts. Elijah becomes more than a man recovering. He becomes a symbol, a silent defiance, proof that even when the world tries to crush your soul, you can still rise in ways they never planned for. The other slaves walk a little straighter around him. They speak his name with a quiet pride, and Miss Carolina feels it. She feels him slipping out of her control. She feels the strength she tried to steal return to him in ways she cannot touch, and that terrifies her, so she makes another accusation, dripping with the same venom, expecting the same blind obedience. But this time, something different happens. Pause. Her husband hesitates. His eyes narrow, not at Elijah but at her. Too many whispers have been spreading, too many sidelong glances, too many servants have carried pieces of truth between rooms. The lie begins to splinter. A sharp argument erupts between husband and wife, loud, vicious, cracking the polished silence of the plantation walls. Secrets spill like broken glass. Their marriage fractures under the weight of her manipulation. The house that once felt like a fortress now echoes with blame and suspicion. Elijah watches from a distance, not with vengeance, but with clarity. Retribution does not always roar. Sometimes it comes as truth slowly eroding the lies that once held power until the power collapses on its own. Years pass. The war ends. Chains fall slowly, unevenly, and with a pain that lingers long after the metal is gone. And on a quiet morning, touched by the first light of freedom, Elijah steps off the plantation for the last time. His back still carries the scars. His heart still remembers the fear. His spirit still trembles when the past whispers to him. But he walks with his shoulders lifted, his gaze steady. Each step a declaration that he lived through what was designed to destroy him. He survived Miss Carolina. He survived the lies. He survived the world that insisted he was less than human. And in that survival, he finds a kind of victory no whip could erase. As he crosses the land he once worked, Elijah understands something deeper than anger. The truth of matters. The truth of what happened to him. The truth of what white women did to black men during slavery. Truths that history books often soften, ignore, or bury. Yet the truth lives inside every scar, every memory, every step he takes into the unknown. Freedom does not erase the past, but it gives him the chance to build a future he will have to shape from nothing, a future with no guarantees. But for the first time, the road ahead belongs to him. The narrator circles back to the audience, voice soft but unshakably firm. The pain is real, the history is real, the scars are real, but so is the strength. The strength that carried Elijah, the strength that carried countless others, the strength that still lives today. And as this story closes, viewers are invited, encouraged to speak, to comment their thoughts, to share the story, to subscribe, to help keep alive the voices history tried its hardest to erase. Because remembering is its own kind of justice.